record. All right, so as I was saying, well, it might be a bit of a mystery of kind of what's going on in these images. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what's going on, what happened through time?
A population of people developed, potentially?
No change in the number of people. No. Yeah.
Deforestation over time?
Yeah, this is actually a picture of the Amazon. It is deforestation over time. Does anyone, let's see, if we're looking at patterns or whatnot, we see a lot that are clustered near this, looks like a stream. Anybody want to guess why we'd see a lot clustered there? Yeah.
Easy to transport the lumber on the river.
Yeah, and actually the deforestation here in Minnesota had a very similar pattern where the first logging and whatnot was next to streams and rivers, because that's before the railroad was put in, before roads were put in, and that was the easiest way to just chop down the trees and send them off. Our state was mostly forested way back when, and like actually much of the world deforested, and land uses completely changed over through time, right? These first couple of chapters, they talk about the concept of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene just being in geology, which is different than geography, obviously, but we talk about geology quite a bit, and actually school here has a big geology department. Geology is a bit more talking about rocks, right, and examining rocks, and often through looking at different layers of rocks through time, you could kind of see what was going on in different time periods. Well, they use the term the Anthropocene because basically, you know, if some being millions of years in the future does some digging to try to figure out what was going on, they're going to find a whole level of basically plastic and stuff, right? Anthropocene, anthropo meaning human, meaning that there's just going to be a human-made layer of rock, right? So you'll notice though that some of the patterns are not by rivers, and they're kind of like these straight lines. People deduce why that is, why there's logging along those straight lines.
Roads?
Yeah, through time, roads became one of the main areas of lumbering. And so, you know, your question of that you would obviously ask is, you know, well, how is this useful? Why is this useful? Well, when they were looking at doing some preserves in the Amazon, they were looking at some of these maps, and these are the lighter green are still vegetation, but they're newer vegetation, right? And the darker green are older growth forests and areas. And so when they looked at this area, they had mapped some of these areas as areas to be preserved. But of course, looking at this map, and of course you'd also do some research on the ground, you would find out that you would go there and it would just be kind of weeds and stuff. It wouldn't be like old growth forest. And so it'd be kind of like, well, what's the point of preserving that, right? But the darker green areas, which are just here and there, right? Those are areas that would make more sense. And so that's the kind of types of things geographers look at. Let's see. Another map. Sometimes you can get data for a map that can be used for multiple purposes. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what basically this is a map of? I'll go with someone else, just to give other people a shot. All right, let's go for it.
It's like a light level map of the United States. And so the little dots represent the amount of like light level emitted from settlement.
Yeah, and the term that was with the map was, I believe, light pollution, which is like a way to think about it. When people use the term light pollution, they're often talking about the fact that, well, you know, when you go out at night and you look up in the sky, ancient peoples would see a giant amount of stars, right? A thick amount of stars. And, you know, this was something that humanity looking up to often pondered and They strove to try to figure out these mysteries. But in our modern day, especially if you live places that have more lights, the less and less of the stars you could see, right? So that's when they use the term pollution, they're mostly talking about your night sky viewing. Well, although these are lights, I would say you could deduce a number of other patterns here. Anybody want to hazard a guess of like other, yeah.
Population density.
Basically, yeah, right? Unless, well, in a more developed countries such as this area, places that are more developed will have more populations. I will say that, well, given this image is from 2007, you could have areas like here that are actually very highly populated, but not as many lights, right? Or if I showed you a picture of Asia, North Korea would be quite a bit darker than you would think given the population. But it's relatively evened out in this geography, and so you can see a number of places. You can see, of course, Chicago, you can see the Twin Cities here. You can also see that basically why people, if they're talking about in this region going to the cities, usually they mean the Twin Cities, even if they're from different states that also have cities, because although they have cities, obviously, they're not as large and not as much kind of going on. Any other patterns? Oh, you got a question?
It's just kind of neat because the light level, and then in the more western, that's in the United States. There's less people, but it's also when the United States started to try to preserve land, so there's less development. And
There's less development, and I would say though, although there's more land that is preserved, a lot of that came about because a lot of it was not that productive of land.
Right.
Honestly, a lot of that was preserved because people didn't want to move there because well, you get drier the more west you get, and you do get a lot of scenic locations and whatnot. Any other patterns that you could kind of deduce from this map? Yeah.
The coastal areas are more light up, so like around the lakes and the coast.
Yeah, worldwide, when we're studying human geography, humans tend to live on coasts for a lot of reasons, right? Access to water resources, as times change, access to travel, leisure, amenities, things like that. But yeah, you could see, well, you could see where the coasts are quite well. Any other patterns in this? Yeah.
Not distinctly, but there's often like lines that form.
Right. And I would guess that those are major highways, right? That would be my guess. I haven't researched it to find out if that's the case. But yeah, you could definitely see lines. Well, when the highways were put in, most of them 50s and 60s, they encouraged a lot of development along them because it was easy to access, right? And so you have a lot of development. Even smaller cities are still along these corridors. All right. Some good guesses. The other thing we're often going to be looking at is trends. One of the reasons to try to, figure out the rules of the world and how things work is to try to guess things that are going to happen, right, going into the future. So for example, y'all don't remember this, but a number of years ago in the 70s, there's a lot of news stories about fire ants that were kind of invading the U.S. There had not been a lot of fire ants previously, but people were becoming a bit worried. And then through time, these are the 80s. It seemed like, that it would be inevitable that fire ants would kind of take over everywhere at the rate that they were going. Have people ever had fire ant problems in Minnesota? Found out through time that there is a limiting factor, and that is they don't survive any place that has a real good freeze, right? Any place that has a real good freeze. So as you can see, although fire ants did go along the coast there, not areas that had really, really good solid freezes, because that is something that species could not withstand. So when we're making predictions and whatnot, it's good to get as much information as possible, because sometimes things that you'll see as trends don't turn out to be, well, to go the way that you would thought. We'll talk more about that in our chapter on population and various predictions about that. Sometimes you can have some stark changes in the landscape through time. As you can see on these images, anyone want to take a guess at what happened to make this place look so different? Yeah.
Draw.
That's a good guess, but I didn't give you a key bit of information, which is that these are 2 days apart. 2 days apart. Yeah.
Fire.
That's another fair guess.
Volcano.
Another fair guess. No, so far that's not what happened. Yeah. Tsunami. People know what a tsunami is? Yeah. A tsunami, exactly. Well, for people who don't know what a tsunami is, it's a large wave. What happened, and this is Thailand in 2004, if memory serves. What happened, well, when a tsunami is coming, it's a displacement of a lot of water, right? A great big wave. And so because you have a great big wave, the areas actually before and after it go down quite a bit, right? Because, you have that mass. And so what happened in this case is you had a lot of locals as well as a lot of tourists, a lot of students who are taking a break, but they're hanging out at what were these beautiful beaches and whatnot. The first sign of a tsunami coming, assuming there's no alarm system, which there was not a very good alarm system at the time. Tsunamis and how much damage they do often depend on kind of how much a place has infrastructure and is developed and has the ability to kind of warn you. If you go to California, for example, you might be on the beach and there'll be actual tsunami, there'll be arrows and they'll say, go this way if there's a tsunami. But as I was saying, the first sign of a tsunami is the water at the beach will recede, right? And it, for tourists and whatnot, they just figured, is this some kind of tide? Because there's natural tides that happen. The locals knew it wasn't a tide, but they also did not know what was happening. And so as the water receded, people actually walked toward this area because all of a sudden all this area that had been underwater was exposed. And so a number of the locals, for example, were like, I could see this old boat that sank all of a sudden. That's very interesting. And so people all kind of came up when they should have been going the opposite direction, right? So it had a pretty big death toll. And I would say, even places that are developed and have the infrastructure for kind of evacuating, when I've gone to them, I've actually kind of noticed that I feel like I often would not go the direction that they would say that they would warn to go. Because often what they'll do is they'll pick like a road and they'll have a sign saying, go this way as quick as you can because it's just a straight road for you to get away from the shore. But if you look at the damage, there are places that are right next to the water that look like they got off scot-free, whereas, you could have been running as fast as you can and you probably would have still been hit by that wave. Anybody want to hazard a guess why this area seemed to do fine?
Cliffs.
Yeah, it's a higher elevation. So if you ever see, sometimes when tsunamis and things happen, people will take videos. If you see those videos, they're often a person who is randomly like at the second or third story of their hotel, and they're just like, and they're catching it. And so I personally would go up in elevation if that was an option, if there's a way to go up rather than the same elevation but away. That would be my technique. But of course, people often can't think that much in such an emergency. Nearly 250,000 people killed with that tsunami. In general, deaths by tsunami have been going down because a lot of places have been developing. Our chapters on development aren't until later in the book, but as places do and they have more money for infrastructure costs and whatnot, they put in warning systems and they put in paved areas and things like that. So, human geography, a lot of the geography we're going to be studying is going to be just kind of a lot of facts, like how many people live in what countries, how development in different places, a lot of these things. A lot of what we're going to be studying are cultural aspects of human geography. Obviously, there's lots of different cultures around the world, but the kind of thing to understand is culture is more of a thing that's happening, because there's diverse cultures all around the world, and often they're butting heads and they're kind of striving for dominance in lots of different ways. And so we'll look at a lot of places that are kind of what we call contested landscapes where you have a number of different kind of visions of reality fighting for everyone's acceptance and approval. This first chapter kind of throws a lot of terms at you, and as I said before, this being a freshman level class, a lot of these terms you've probably heard before, and like lines of longitude and latitude. You've probably in other classes have studied the globe and looked at the different lines, and you know that that's how we measure space across the Earth, and absolute location, right? These types of words and terms, well, absolute location, in our time of GPS, we often are able to tell pretty quickly what our absolute location is without too much doubt. Oh, I talked about physical geography and human geography already. I would say the other thing with human geography, or the field of geography in general, is it's very interested in the connections between things, right? There used to be a very common phrase that the study of geography is everything, right? It's everything in all the different fields of study, it's just where. But I would add into that, it is the connection between those places and people in different places, right? And one of the subtopics that we'll be talking about a lot is globalization, right? Globalization. The world is becoming more kind of integrated in lots of ways. And I know after the pandemic, it might seem like the opposite was happening for a while, and it was. The opposite was happening for a while. So for example, the growth of the economy in China for many years relied on trade networks, and it relied on people wanting to purchase cheap manufactured goods that were made in China. And so for many years, just about any product that you would buy, if you looked at the label, it would say made in China. During the pandemic, countries around the world found that they kind of had to find alternative sources for lots of their products. China had a stronger lockdown than the US, and every time there would be some amount of cases and things would get locked down, similar to when we had our first lockdown where people didn't go to work, right? If you don't go to work, products aren't being made. And so internationally, if you're in another country and perhaps you have something like, you're making water bottles, and maybe a part comes from China, right? Well, if China's in a shutdown, you're losing money by not selling these, right? And so a lot of countries around the world, often it was political leaders would give incentives to local companies to figure out replacements to keep their economies moving. And so, a few years have been spent, countries around the world figured out how to make these different products themselves. And so manufacturing in the US and in other countries has actually increased during the pandemic. And now, China finally basically reconnected with the world, and it kind of wanted to be where it left off. but much of the world, well, they've already figured out the other ways to get the things that they need. And so, well, China is going through, although a lot of people talk about the rise of China and economically how well China is doing, and there's lots of predictions about China's economy eventually surpassing the US. These days, actually, most of the predictions are quite a bit different. Feasibly, it's possible that China never passes the US, even though they have a much larger population. But that actually has a lot to do with population problems as well, which we'll cover. Like I said, we got 3 chapters on population, so I'll try to not to go into it too much. Geographic perspectives. Spatial perspective, well, that is what it sounds like, but that's the thing that we're going to be looking at a lot, right? We'll look at a lot of maps, and we're going to look at a lot of distributions of things, and then try to figure out, well, why are things spread out the way they are, right? Ecological perspective, again, because basically, although if you think ecology, you might think physical geography, you can't really take people out of the ecology because, well, we survive on the ecology, right? It affects how people do things, where they live. So an example of how physical geography, the physical environment, has a lot of effect on culture. Something like, where is wheat cultivated and where's wheat grown and where is wheat harvested, right? And how does that affect the world? Wheat being a crop, people know where wheat came from? Let me wait a sec. Anybody else? Yeah.
West Asia?
Yeah. Basically the area that's known as the Fertile Crescent, which is kind of in the central, what we call the Middle East mostly. But yeah, this region. And so it is a crop that is very much, well, it's not from the climate that we live in, right? It's from a much drier climate. It's from a different climate almost entirely. Areas of wheat production, you see some major areas and some less areas. And so the area that wheat is from, you can see there's actually lots of places in that area that wheat is not grown. Wheat, although it comes from a dry region, it tends to need, a lot of moisture, like lots of crops. But as you can see, most of the world's wheat is not grown in the area that it originated from, right? And that's the case for many different types of crops. Now wheat, of course, for thousands of years have become a staple of the diet of many areas around the world, including, for example, regions that they used to have the main staple was rice. It's a lot of those areas are switching to wheat for a number of different reasons. One of the main ones being is mechanization of farming and harvesting wheat, right? For humans, if we could figure out to have a machine do a lot of our work for us, well, we will do that, right? We will change our diets. If we could have machines make food a lot cheaper. And so I'm not saying that people have turned their back on rice in areas that they traditionally used to have, that used to be the main staple. But rice, well, it's difficult to mechanize. It's difficult to mechanize because it usually needs a lot of standing water, right? Standing water tends to, it makes machines rust. And the mechanization of wheat harvesting and production, at this point, that was like over 100 years ago that we really started mechanizing it, right? Especially in the U.S. A big part of the U.S.'s development, so you can see lots of wheat. I would say the wheat is its ups and downs in the U.S. Because, harvesting of wheat as a monocrop, it can really take a lot of nutrients out of soils, and it needs a lot of water. So Dust Bowl time, Great Depression time, a number of states that tend to be drier that actually used to harvest a lot of wheat, they their fields just would not grow it anymore. And a lot of their wells went dry. And a lot of those areas switched to either alternatives or different things entirely. All right, that's probably enough about wheat. This is just a map of global vegetation in a nutshell. And well, if you look at this map, you could see that there's a lot of different factors to our natural environments that affect where people live, right? People tend to want to live on coasts. People tend to want to live in places that you can grow food that you could eat, right? Things like this. And there's lots of climates around the world. And there's lots of different, well, yeah, I'm not going to go too deep into that topic. Actually, how are we doing on time? We're doing okay? All right. I like to give a lot of time for students to answer questions in class in small groups, and so that's why I keep on checking the time, because sometimes I don't give enough time, and y'all are kind of new in this class, so I might want to make sure give everyone a proper amount of time. Well, I'll talk about other concepts from this chapter before I switch gears and do that. Like I said, a lot of these terms you know and are pretty obvious. Location, absolute location, street address, things are absolute. Relative location, right? Maybe if you're giving someone directions, you would give relative location. Turn by the old tree and go by where the school that burnt down used to be, things like that. Mental maps. Mental maps are very relative maps because they're a person thinking through things, right? So for example, if you were going to draw a mental map of the most important places in your day, right? Well, that map wouldn't actually be that correct from a geographical perspective because it would go by relative importance to you, right? Mental maps. Again, more terms that you probably have heard before, space, I'm sure you've heard the term space, distribution, density, pattern, right? These are all things that we were just looking at, right? When it was looking at lights, distribution, right? Looking at wheat, we're looking at the distribution. The wheat and light also were showing elements of density, right? We're looking at law patterns and trying to figure out what they meant. I would say none of those maps that we've looked at so far have shown a lot of flow. Not a lot of flow so far. We'll get to maps of that kind before too long. A couple more important terms. Place. In geography, we have a term that's called a sense of place. Sense of place, it's one of the reasons why I try to travel as much as possible, because although we will do a lot of readings and I'll show you videos to try to help you get a sense of place, it's difficult to know a place without actually going there. And then going there, you still might not actually get a sense of what it's like to actually live in a place. So for example, I've been on many different tours at different places, and sometimes you'll have a tour that you're basically just on a bus the whole time. You don't really interact with locals. You go to kind of a couple monuments and that's it. And people will kind of feel like they've really experienced a place. But no, you've experienced a place as a tourist, right? You've experienced a place similar to if you watched it on a TV screen. Or you could have other tours that are actually much more rigorous. Often they'll have an age requirement. I'm aging out of a lot of these tours because you're going to have to do some hiking, you're going to have to do some actual rigorous stuff to get to the places. And you might stay at places that are cheap, right? And actually when you do that, you're more likely to get more of an accurate sense of place as far as how it's lived for the people there. Well, anyway, that's a thing that geographers strive for, is to get a sense of place. Some other terms: site, physical characteristics of place; situation, places, location in relation to other places or features, right? So geography really talks about situation a lot, right? It's like, well, okay, this is this place, but what is its situation? The example that I used earlier was the Twin Cities, right? It's like, well, we're a pretty major urban area, and we're surrounded by lots of areas that are not major urban areas. So that makes us a bit unique in our local geography. Of course, there's lots of many other elements to the situation that we're in, but that's it. A couple more concepts. Distance decay, right? We're getting into terms that you are less likely to have heard elsewhere. Distance decay, I think a good example of that is often, maybe you could find something that is like a trend, right? It's like, oh, we're I don't know, there's a new dance that's popular that people are doing. Well, very often, the further out you get in time or space from wherever that trend was, usually you have a bit of a distance decay where it's less and less as you go away through time as well. I would say in our very globally interconnected time, distance decay has become a bit less easy to map because people are so connected to other people around the world in so many ways. So you could have a trend. And we'll study some like internet trends or social media trends that strangely happen in pockets. Time-space compression. Time-space compression. This is another thing that we'll talk about. Well, again, it's just the term I was just using, how globalized and interconnected things are. There was a time that if you wanted to communicate with someone over great distances, well, you'd have to get out a piece of paper and you'd have to write that letter out. And it would be fortunate if you lived in an area where there was a mail service that functioned and that could happen in a reasonable amount of time. But it could take days, weeks, months, depending on how far a letter had to go. Maybe it wouldn't show up sometimes, right? Travel as well. Travel used to take large amounts of time. If you're ever watching something that is supposed to take place in kind of ancient times, I guess most people, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, when people are traveling and, they'll really speed up the amount of time that it takes people to travel by horseback and whatnot, because it would be boring. It would be boring if it was going to be a month between scenes. Because it's like, oh, you're going to go to the next castle? That's a month on your horse. It's like, is that going to be good footage? No. But time-space compression, of course, there's only so fast you could have people themselves move around across the Earth's surface. But the communication, right? Especially since satellite communication. So now it's near instantaneous around the world, right? So the time that it takes, the distance decay factor is being changed up because the time-space compression is changing through time. Environmental determinism. This is one of our first kind of big concepts in this chapter. Environmental determinism, that is basically when people decide that the physical geographic characteristics of a place define the people there, right? And the field of geography itself used to rely on this a lot. But then through time, as it was rigorously examined, it was determined that a lot of the things that people were chalking up for an environmental effect of people was actually more of a cultural thing rather than the actual physical environment. Do our harsh winters make us just a tougher people? It's like, well, I don't know about that, right? But this meme was going around, so I thought it was a good example. Very often, especially during the colonial period, Europeans would have this kind of idea in their minds that they were from the ideal climate, and any other places that had different climates would just never be able to develop as much, right? Through time, though, as other places around the world developed, a lot of people had to face the fact that, well, environmental determinism, it's not, you have to actually rigorously look at the different cultures and look at development, because as development has progressed, there's plenty of places that are extremely developed that are in different climates, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, well, we want to acknowledge that different environments have their limitations, but at the same time, also acknowledge that people are very innovative and they could usually figure things out, right? Whatever their problems are. And that's another concept in this first chapter, possibilism. Possibilism. In a nutshell, that means that whatever problems people in different areas of the world have, if they work at it, they could often figure out workarounds. They could figure out solutions to what's going on. And environmental determinism in general and that kind of way of thinking, it could be very limiting, because then you could assume that people won't be able to figure out a way around all these different kinds of problems, but people do, again and again. All right, I think now we're getting short on time, so I'm gonna skip ahead. I think I got some questions here. Oh, actually, I was right next to it. All right, these are some maps from the book, and I have a couple questions for you. And so what we're gonna do today, well, this isn't the best. Groups in size from 3 to 5 people, 3 to 5 people. So the standard thing we're gonna do, well, today I'm gonna let you self-select. In the future, I'll start selecting you as groups. But in groups of 3 to 5, you have one piece of paper, all of your names on top, full names, so I could easily put it in the grade book. And you're just gonna have these 3 questions. They're not too complex today, but see what you could think out, see how you could answer them. All right, and when you finish, you bring it on up here and I'll grade it right away.
I got that on the
Thank you.
I gotta send my room to it. It's so cold.